Namaste. A very good morning to one and all, and welcome to the fourth day of National Webinar on Learning and Innovation for Inclusive Education. Now, there are a few announcements before we start the presentation. Host will be sending a Google Form link, request to fill in and submit. This we require for the certification purpose. As far as possible, try and attend all the sessions of webinar, that is 6 webinar sessions. I understand there are hitches like, there is no network, there are a lot of rain issues or whatever the hitches may be, but try and, as far as possible, try and attend all the sessions. Okay. Now I request Ms. Poonam Matre to formally introduce our expert today. Over to you, Poonam.
Good morning, one and all. I, Mrs. Poonam Mhatre, teacher, Department of Education, AYJNISHD, welcome you all on third day of National Webinar, fourth day of National Webinar Learning and Innovations for Inclusive Education. Culture is symbolic communications which transpires through attitude, motives, knowledge, skills, behavior. It is inculcated in an individual through family and is later strengthened at school. So for today's topic, building inclusive school culture, we have an expert, Mrs. Revathi Srinivasan, Director, Education of Singhania Schools and Principal of Srimati Sulochana Devi Singhania School, Thane, a passionate educationist with 30 years of experience. Mrs. Revathi Srinivasan, an innovative thinker and leader, has won awards and accolades in India and Europe for her work in the fields of inclusive education. faculty competence, thought leadership, design thinking, innovations in pedagogy and assessments and parenting. Her immense contribution to the field of education has been recognized with several prestigious awards such as the Times Icon Award 2019, Icon of Thane 2020 by Economic Times, Premium Rotary Vocational Thane District's Navdurga Award, and NDTV National Award for Excellence in Inclusive Education and Teacher Training. She has been recognized by the British Council for leading the integration and international learning in the school. Has also been felicitated by HRH Prince Edward, Earl of Wessex, and by the Council of General of Australia for her years of committed service to the cause of education. Mrs. Revathi is also a recognized writer, and her articles are appreciated in India as well as abroad. Mrs. Srinivasan's penchant for societal transformation has motivated her to run the free vocational training center for street boys, helping them for skill training and further employment. Till date, 3,780 uneducated street boys have been rehabilitated. She also has adopted the villages for overall development with basic facilities of primary education, primary health, and solar power, which has helped the Adivasis to have a decent life. I request Revathi Madam to begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Poonam, for that lovely introduction. You just have been magnanimous. I must say that it is my proud privilege to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. Suni, for Matthew, for inviting me here and giving me an opportunity to just share my views. I wouldn't call myself an expert because I'm not a special educator, but I think I've got about 3 decades of what I believe education is and what I think I'm passionate about. And that's about inclusion in schools. And I think it is all about building a culture, which is more important for me than having a diktat across. So I really feel that it's a part of me that's going to be speaking today. It's a part of what I live my life as, is what I'm going to be sharing with all the speakers today, with all of you as guests today. So thank you very much for inviting me to this national seminar. And thank you, Dr. Varsha Gatu, who's been chasing me, getting my appointments, ensuring that I was here on time. Thank you so much for being here. It is indeed a proud privilege to be here. Building an inclusive culture in schools is my topic for the day. And as I speak about this, the first thing that comes across to me is 1, inclusion, 2, culture, and 3, building. So if I were to use these 3 words separately, how am I going to use them now? How am I going to work with them is how I'm going to be taking you forward. A lot of experiences, personal experiences as a principal of a school, I will be sharing with you so that you can sort of connect with your own institutions the way it is. Yes, next slide, please. So we move, next slide. So I have about 13,000 children in all whom I take care of, and all of them are so diverse, and that's the beauty of it. You celebrate the diversity. Inclusive education is essential. It should be a norm, not an exception. It's not something that we have to teach separately. It is not something that we have to view separately. It has to be a part of us. It's a way of living. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. Yeah. Next one. These are the 4 aspects of my presentation. The first is what is culture and how is culture made or built or sort of protected in an institution? What is inclusion and how do we manage that? The keys to inclusion and connections. And the 4th aspect is building an inclusive culture in schools. And I will be stressing on how important it is to build a culture of inclusion. It's not inclusion alone. And there is a striking difference between the two. Very often, we in schools say that ours is an inclusive school. By inclusive school, we just mean that we have students with diverse abilities, capabilities, whatever you may call it. On the one hand, there is the inclusion, and the other one is integrated. And there has to be a very, very clear distinction between the two. To me, integration is about having all things the way it is, and children just come in and adjust to the system that is already prevailing. That's integration. So you're integrating all children into your institution. The second part is inclusion, where you are looking at every individual child with the individual needs of the children, and you're seeing every child as a little petal of a lotus flower. So if you were to compare like that, you will start seeing that. And if you start tending to every petal of the flower, how beautiful the flower would be on the whole. That's exactly how little children in a school will look beautiful, and the school becomes more beautiful. So that's what it is. And next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking now on what is culture, according to me. So culture to me is about, have the slide, please. So the culture to me would be about having a whole lot of set of beliefs that we have. You may have a structure, you may have a content. It is about greater knowledge, stories that bring across, language that are eating habits, all of that, tools and objects that make culture. So basically, it is a set of beliefs that we have and a shared pattern of beliefs that we have, assumptions that we already have, and expectations that we have, the roles that we play, the values that we have, the patterns of behavior that are displayed in our institutions, the norms, the artifacts. So what are artifacts over here? That comes out very distinctly different from the others. So all that we see, all that we hear, all that we smell and taste are artifacts. Touch, for example, language, for example, it's an artifact. They're all tangible signs of saying this is the culture of the institution. For example, and I'm sharing one very live example. I had a celebrity, Mr. Shankar Mahadevan, entering my school institution. So at the gate, the security always says a namaste and asks, "Sir, whom have you come to meet?" and ask for the details. But the way he asks the details is very, very polite. And then he comes along with the person and says, "Sir, would you like to have some water?" And so when he shared this incident with me, he told me, "This is what struck me most about your institution. I'm walking into this institution for the first time, and this is what struck me. Politeness, humility, welcoming." And it starts right at the gate. And that defines the culture of an institution. So that's what we are talking now about when we say that our culture needs to be something that we have to build for ourselves. So culture, to me, makes leaders as well. If you build culture carefully, you are actually transforming everything in and out. The next slide, please. So this is what I was talking about. You can go on with the next slide, please. The shared patterns and beliefs and assumptions, the behavior, the artifacts. So this is how culture works. Let's see what is our investment. What are we putting in? What are the components of culture? So it can be values, it can be things that we do, the norms, people who are involved in building that culture. All of that will only lead to greater investment. And if you have to reach the pinnacle, then you need a committed, continuous way of functioning in such a way that you have to bring all these aspects of culture together so that the institution stands tall as a culmination of all our efforts. And that is what we have to do. And therefore, the ROI, if we can put it as return on investment, will be high. In other words, it means to say the more you invest in your culture, the better you are transformed within yourself. And when you're transformed within yourself, you will see the change in the institution. So that's the kind of effect that it has in our own system. So that's why culture is important. And why am I stressing on this is that I'm going to be combining inclusion and I'm going to be combining culture and then defining how do we build it. So this part of the culture is very, very important. Thank you. Next. So school culture, basically, everyone thinks that this is the school culture and there it stands, period, full stop. But that's not it. The school culture is the big culture, okay, the whole institutional culture. But it is broken down into various subcultures. And what are these various subcultures? It could be your classroom culture, it is the kids' culture, it is the staff room culture, it is the recess culture, it can be the teenage and adult culture, it can be a whole lot of even a school bus culture or a playground culture. So each of these are subsets of the mega set. And what does this entail? So, for example, our culture in our classroom is when the teacher is in the class and when the teacher is not in the class. You will see the difference in the cultures completely, in the behaviors. When you see the it being there for a long time, and this is a shared belief that yes, you're well behaved when the teacher's there and not well behaved when the teacher's not there. That means it is a culture, subculture that children are setting. So they are influenced by the culture of the school. That is why in many schools that you will see, the teacher may or may not be there, but the children could be doing their own work. That's a culture that the school has set. For example, there are schools where they encourage meditation between two periods when the teacher is not there, when the teacher is switching classes, they encourage meditation. I know of a school in Mumbai which plays some music suddenly and the children begin to dance. So you can have any kind of kinesthetics or movement with that. That's a culture that they have set. They were talking to me about how they like to energize their children in between two classes. I think that's very, very good. The next is kid culture. Kid culture is when kids are not monitored. For example, they let the guards down. They don't really bother about it. For example, walking on the corridor during a period or after a class is over, but they don't recognize or acknowledge a teacher who is not taught them. That's a culture they are setting for themselves. So if there's a culture of discipline in the school, and I'm not talking about discipline in the school, I'm talking about culture of discipline, which means it is self-motivated and self-inspired, then automatically you will see that the children fall in line or wish the person who is opposite them. It doesn't matter whether they know the person or not. Even if they smile their way through, I think it's a good culture. When you smile, you bring smiles on the faces of others and you're creating a happy atmosphere in school. So I think that's another culture that we're talking about. The adult culture, parents, visitors, they're all unspoken, unwritten, but people fall in place, fall in line, follow whatever is being said. That's a culture that they build, that you respect. This is a culture of mutual respect, respecting oneself and respecting others rather than, cutting cues, jumping across and making a noise. The staff culture, the culture of the teachers, of the staff members, the service staff, the support staff, the admin, the chats, the laughter will be always there. Discussions will also happen, but nothing can be toxic. So when you have a toxic culture, we are talking about a not so good culture in schools. So external culture would be something where there is the culture in the district, in the country, in the society. For example, when the pandemic broke out, and there was this uncertainty with regards to opening of schools and colleges, uncertainty with regards to jobs. There were people who got restless. There were people who got frightened. They were sort of uncertain, fearful. And all of this led to certain behavioral patterns. And that means lack of tolerance, lack of patience, or use of abusive language or abusive body movements. All of these, you could see that impatience, you could see the intolerance absolutely setting in. Now, this is because of an influence of an outside society. And that's because of a greater problem across the world. So, how do we manage that? Now, for example, I know if I can speak about schools because I'm supposed to be talking more about schools today. And I'm talking in terms of when you enter a school, there are schools where they would have a lot of material which is ready made. And there are schools that would be having materials made of made by children. Okay, they're little handicrafts, little charts that they are made. They're written, there are spelling mistakes there, but children have researched and presented their work. I would rather prefer to appreciate the work done by children than have a project so readily, so beautifully made. In fact, sometimes we are amazed to see the kind of work that children may do quite independently. And that's the work that we have to appreciate. It is not about coming and making a grand show of things. So, a simple thing that I can share from my side again, just to emphasize on what is culture. uh, Even if the guest comes, we don't really put up a show for the guest. If the chairman of the school comes in, there's nothing that's disrupted. The timetables will not go differently. The recess timing bells will not ring differently. Nothing will happen differently. Everything is as always. If children are walking in the corridor and the guests are coming in, so be it. Because I can't put up an act. The minute I put up an act, I am teaching my children to put up an act for others. So let's be honest, and this is how it is. But what can we do then? If you think that everything has to be status quo, even when guests come, it doesn't matter, let children be children, then we have to integrate in our system a culture of discipline, a culture of mutual respect, a culture of warmth, care, and compassion. That is a culture that will make the school a happy school. So if we figure out all these cultures that are going to be set in, we have to sort of touch on each of the subcultures and we have to work on the bigger culture of the school. So that is the reason why I feel these are things that cannot be ignored. Little behavioral things also cannot be ignored. So how does it work? For me, it all depends on relationships. How important is a relationship to me defines how important am I going to be with respect to all my aspects of culture. For example, my belief, my assumption, my norms, my behavior, all of that, my artifact, everything will depend on how much I respect the relationship. To the next slide, please. So culture comes from core beliefs and assumptions. And so I think, to me, culture comes before curriculum. So that's what I like to say. I think even in the dictionary, it comes before, and it comes to me also much before curriculum. Your curriculum can have aspects of culture, but culture must be given its due place. And any occupation, any institution, or anything, I think this culture has to be a part of it. It doesn't matter whether it's a school. Why am I talking about the school? Because I head schools. And why am I talking about schools? Because we have to catch them young. If we build that within themselves, it's a part of our lives. And that's the way we will. Okay, so even inadvertently or even not very consciously, very subconsciously, this culture and positive culture, good culture will work, and that's what people will sort of imbibe. So that's what I would like to say about the culture aspect. The next slide, please. So while I talk about culture as well, I'm going to be talking to you about 4 types of cultures that I see apart from these. For example, there can be culture which is strong and good. There can be a culture which is strong and bad. For example, a toxic culture in your staff room or in your workplace, where there is one-upmanship all the time, or there is competitiveness all the time, or it could be the stinging words that goes from one end to the other all the time, or just no communication at all. Okay, this becomes strong, yes, but the institution is doing well. So you have a strong, by the way of their work, they are very good. By the way of the interpersonal relationship, they're not so good. So in that case, it's a strong culture, it's cool, but yet it is bad. It's not good for the institution in the long run. The other culture that I can think about is a weak and a good culture. And the fourth aspect of culture can be a weak and a bad culture, where everybody's lazy also and everybody's toxic as well. So you can imagine what would be the institution like. So I think that's again something that an institutional head needs to look into. So culture basically comes from the structure and from the content. So when we do inclusive education, we have to remember that we have to see patterns in our relationships. And when we see that, we have to start nurturing each of these. So that's why, to me, to build a very good, strong, inclusive culture, it means first we need to take care of our surroundings, our environment. Just as the gardener would come across to set the soil properly, we have to create the environment. An environment where there are positive outlooks, positive vibes, and positive thoughts. And then we plant the little sapling. The sapling, let's consider the sapling as culture. You start nurturing it. So you start tending to it. You give it time. It needs time to build. So you cannot expect the little sapling that you planted 1 week later, it turns into a nice little plant and a flower comes over there. It won't. So it needs time. We need to give time. But while we are giving it time, can we just let it go like that? No. We will really have to take care of every aspect of that growth of that plant, from the soil loosening to tending to the dry leaves and tending to the fresh leaves, taking care of that there are no insecticides or there are no insects on it. All of that is our responsibility. And then you shape that plant later. You shape that plant and give it a nice shape. For a time, you will see that the plant tends to go in the shape that it wishes to go, and that's towards sunlight. And that's what it means, that when you have people around you who are positive, the plant will take the direction and grow in the direction of that sunlight. That means the culture will become more positive. That's what I'd like to draw an analogy for this. So next slide, please. So I'd like to say good culture has to be interlinked with internal transformation. That means when there is good culture, there's internal transformation happening within the society, and vice versa too. When there is internal transformation happening and people have started to question, people are finding good solutions, all of that, then you will see a good culture building in. And it is also essential. We have to make efforts to build a good culture. Culture is not handed over. Very often we have seen institutions as old as 100 years plus. Suddenly people say that it's losing its name. Why do they say that? They say that because the internal transformation is not happening the way it happened earlier. So when we start working on internal transformation towards the positive, of course, which is very essential for good culture and needs to be linked with good culture, I think we really have what we know as good culture or building of the culture in schools. So I would like to say over here that we see patterns in our behaviors, we see patterns in our relationships. So most often than not, we see inclusion, because I'm coming to that aspect of it. We see inclusion somewhere as if it is a goal. And I think, to me, personally, I think it's a mistake. Inclusion cannot be a goal. I will ensure that my institution is an inclusive institution, cannot be a goal for the institution. Inclusion is a way of life. It has to be a way of life. There is no separate consideration that needs to be made. And I love the way the national education policy is shaping up and has shaped up. It speaks to chapter 6 about the inclusion aspect. And it touches on this aspect of saying, give importance to inclusiveness, equity, and understanding of children. I think that comes out very beautifully in chapter 6 of the NEP Act. And I think that's, again, something that one needs to think in terms of. So we don't have to give inclusion a separate consideration at all. But can we breathe it? Can we eat? Can we sleep with it? Can we drink it? And if I were to put them all in a personification model, I would say we should do all of it. In other words, we live it. And when we live it and we breathe it, it comes to life. And you will see that culture building, the building of an inclusive culture in every institution builds. It's given, it's accepted, and it becomes a part of living. It should become a part of our system. So if I were to see on the whole, we have made a lot of improvement in the past decade. A lot of procedures have been set in. So the procedural and the legal, at the legal level, I would say that a lot of thought and a lot of direction has come. I think, but at the same time, there is another aspect. I did specify that a lot, relationships. That comes from human beings. So human minds, somehow, not all human minds, but most human minds, and I'm talking about the society at large, have got a lock, a mind lock. Either they don't understand what inclusion really means, and even if they understand it, then they've understood it in a manner that says that you need a different set of skill sets to be able to practice inclusion. And I lack those skill sets. I don't have it. So I cannot handle it. Okay. So I'm going to come across to, again, now what is inclusion to me. Okay. Yes. Next slide, please. So this is a very critical aspect of a good school, and that's inclusion. So most people ask this question, why inclusion? My answer to this is that normally in education, the why and how of things are very important. What is not important for an educator, and I'm an educator at heart as well. But in this case, I'd like to say that the why is not important. The how is more important than the why. Why do we have inclusion is not a question at all. How do we do it is the question. And how do we make it happen is the question. The next slide. Yeah, just go ahead, please. So I'm just going to take you to a school. I'll take you to my school. You'll have children with complexes. Complexes that they are dark, complexes that they don't come from a very well-off family. So I have a school with diverse children with from different socioeconomic strata. I have my driver's children, the toilet cleaner's children sitting with the CEO's children. And it's all an include because it's a corporate run school. So obviously we have different strata. Admissions are all through random sampling, the computer method. So we don't know who comes from where. And I remember doing my presentation, and which is my orientation for the new parents of junior KG. And after an hour of my talking, and I said namaste, and I was trying to walk out, there were two hands that went up. So the hands that went up, I just looked up at them and I asked them, "Yes, sir, may I help you?" And that gentleman said, "Madam, आपने जो बोला वो मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा, सुनने के लिए बहुत अच्छा लगा, लेकिन कुछ भी समझा नहीं, क्योंकि मैं अंग्रेजी नहीं जानता हूँ। ये हमारे गांव का सबसे पहला इंग्लिश स्कूल में गया 10वीं पास होगा, यदि हमारा बच्चा आपके स्कूल में आके 10वीं तक करेगा
तो अपनी आवाज नहीं जाएगी।
ये मैं इस्त्री करता हूँ at the local naka." I was touched. I said, "आपको हिंदी में बोलूं या मराठी में?" So he said, "नहीं, आप हिंदी में बोलिए." And then I stood there. I said, "Parents, you can all go. If you wish to wait, you can wait, but I'm going to be translating the entire orientation in Hindi." And when I started to address the audience, I had more than 100 people still sitting in the audience. And I realized that so many people wanted that conversation to happen in Hindi. I'm not giving an example for a reason and of telling that how the school took care, but I'm trying to talk to you about how important it is to be able to reach out. And that's what all children need, that the teacher reaches out to them and addresses them at any time during that 40 minutes that she's in class. There are children who do not understand things fast. They can't work fast. Children who have adjustment problems, they can't fit into a scheme of things. Individually, they are very good, but somehow with friends, they can't mix up. They don't know what to talk. They don't know how to present themselves. That's a problem. That's an adjustment problem. There are children who can be in a group, be laughing over there, smiling across, but they are completely isolated. They are completely separated from the group. They are there, but they are alone and they are lonely. There are children with feelings of insecurity. Sometimes it happens when the family background is not so conducive. It's not very positive. Then it happens that they have. It could be insecurity of money, for example, if the parents are from very humble beginnings, then they would be having money problem, and they have the fear of not having enough money. So there could be insecurity due to many reasons. There are children who know a lot of things but will never express themselves. They'll never raise their hands to say, "I want to answer" or "I want to talk." They would never say that. If you ask them if you have any doubts, they are the ones who just keep quiet. So they're afraid to express themselves. There are children who are introverted. They need so much of push to be able to express again. That could be one of them. There are children who are shy. And there are children who are bullies as well. And there are children who are show-offs as well. And there are children with learning disabilities or learning difficulties. However, universally, quite often than not, when we talk about inclusion, we are talking about children with learning disabilities. We are talking about differently abled children. We are talking in terms of special children. That's not the fact. You and I always tell my teachers, you and I too may be needing that inclusion. And all of us need, every human being needs an inclusion. If we don't feel that we are included in a group, we are not happy. We are not happy within ourselves. We feel we are isolated. So the problems that students face in our classrooms are the problems that adults face in their workplace as well as in the society. However, because they are adults, we choose to neglect it, and their outcomes may be different and their outbursts may be different in different ways, whereas we may react with our children differently. So the problems that are faced by students are these many, and that calls for inclusion. That's what I'm trying to say. If you want to talk about diversity in your class, you cannot talk about diversity without inclusion. It has no meaning. That word diversity itself does not have a meaning. Next, please. So as educators, do not ask why inclusion, rather ask how are we going to bring in an inclusive culture in our school? How are we bringing a culture of inclusiveness in our schools? That should be our question. So that's what I would say. So is it enough to bring inclusion, or do we have to bring a culture of inclusion? And I would still prefer a culture of inclusion because it will stay with us forever. Next slide, please. What are the keys to build an inclusive culture? So I have a bunch of keys, 5 keys, very attractive, all very different. One is the culture of reflection. 2 is culture of awareness, acceptance, and respect. Culture of care and relationships, in relationships. Culture of discipline and responsibility. Culture of mindfulness. If I have these 5 cultures in my school, I can proudly say I run a school with an inclusive culture. A culture of reflection will make us see ourselves in a mirror, see where the gaps are. What is it that needs to be filled? How was my behavior today? Did I address this thing correctly? Self-reflection brings in a lot of thoughts, and thoughts leads to good actions. Culture of awareness, acceptance, respect, so very important in our lives. Not just for children, but for adults as well. Are we aware that others are having this kind of problem? Are we able to accept people who are a little different from us? And are we able to respect them for what they are? If we are able to respect people and accept them for what they are, I think we have done a great job. So many often people say tolerance is important. To me, more than tolerance, it is acceptance that's important. So you can tolerate someone, but if you accept it, it's more beautiful and more positive than tolerance. So for me, acceptance is a word that I'd like to use. In relationships, you need care. Care is not only with parents, grandparents, in-laws, and relatives and friends. Care with every relationship, and the relationship can be even a stranger. Are we able to reach out to them? Culture of discipline and responsibility. If we start owning up our responsibilities and the onus of commitment is on us, you will automatically set a culture of discipline. And this is what we have to work with our children on, that we create this. So if we can acknowledge and understand others' problems, if we can embrace that diversity, irrespective of whether we know them or not know them, but they are part of our institution, if we are able to create an innovative, very creative environment, if we have a very collaborative approach to all our thinking, and if we are committed, and if we have a committed relationship and a shared vision, you will have a culture of mindfulness. And when you have a culture of mindfulness, you can't ask for anything more. You will see that diversity is being appreciated, applauded, celebrated. And diversity has found its meaning because it has no meaning without inclusion. So we don't have to think about inclusion as a goal, as I mentioned earlier. You don't have to think about it as a goalpost over there that you need to touch or grab and bring it back. You just have to think that it's your life. And when we think it's our life, we'll make that healthier, better, positive, more beautiful, isn't it? So inclusive culture to me starts on the premise that everyone in the school feels good, realizes their potential, feels empowered, feels that they are able to contribute to the life and soul of the institution. This is so much applicable for adults as it is for us. So that's reason why all of us play a very important role for our institution to build a very inclusive culture. The next slide, please. So culture and inclusions, I spoke to you about, is about connections. Be it the principal, the friends, the students, the office people, the parents, the teachers, the outsiders. You can draw as many bulbs as you can, but all of them will light up the minute one touches the other. It's just like that electricity. You have the power on and you will know that all the lights light up. So the same way, connection is all about that. Inclusion is all about that. So culture and inclusions will come in automatically when we connect with people. And we connect with people without any barriers in our mind or, externally. So we just connect with them truly from our heart. And so culture comes from our heart and from our soul. So if you have to contribute to that, you will have to do it wholeheartedly. So all of them together will help you to build that connection. The next slide, please. The next one, yeah. So how do we build inclusion as a culture in schools? It starts from the top, the leadership. A very strong framework that we need to build of inclusive culture. For example, I would say, let's begin with the strengths. This is what I would say school leaders can do. If we all can take a piece of paper and write down about people whom we know, 10 things that we know about that person. In a school, a teacher can do it for her children in her classroom. After writing out 10 points without too much of thought, just keep writing because you've been handling those children, you will know it. After that, just read that paper through. You will find some negative points, some positive points, and sometimes a combination of all. Once you know all that, that will primarily surface every time you're interacting with a child. And then if as teachers, we consciously try to highlight all the strengths of the children, negate the negatives, then the teacher will handle every child differently. So when you say, I have a class of 40, how can I handle children differently? It is possible if you start listing this yourself. So for example, if you find a boy who's very lazy in the class all the time, you have listed him in your thing as lazy. So the minute you see the boy, you sort of think about the laziness aspect. But what is good about him? The minute you get his attention, then he is completely with you in everything that you are teaching. Then we need to highlight that aspect. So all that you need to do is to wake up that lazy child. So how do you kindle that interest? How do you provide that stimulus? I think that depends upon the teacher. Encouraging atmosphere where you have values, ethics, beliefs, all of that put together, where the principal practices it, the leadership practices it, and ensure you also as a principal must know how to define success. That's very important. The teachers and the parents will play a very important role. They must know what is actively getting involved and actively participating in the whole thing, must know what is the kind of vision that we have, must know how do we provide opportunities for our children to grow, and how do we have an open door policy of not being judgmental about children. So the minute we do that, they'll start speaking what they wish to speak. So they're not guarded. When they're not guarded, you will actually know what's playing in their minds. So very often when we come across children with maybe mild symptoms of depression or anything, one of this that strongly comes across is the fact that they have been cooped up far too long. They have no avenue to speak. They have no place where they can talk and say that this is my problem. It may be a problem that's negligent or not at all a problem. But they are seeing it a problem because a 15-year-old mind sees that little thing as a problem. So how do teachers, parents, and leadership on the one hand work together? On the other hand, If the school feels that they don't have that kind of skill sets to handle this, how do we seek a professional help for the school? How do we get guidance and counseling? How do we help people to come in, like psychologists, therapists, who can come and talk to the children? How can we activate uh, activities in such a manner and a lot of learning materials that will bring about celebration of diversity? That's what we have to start looking at. So this leads to this way of looking of building inclusion in schools. And that when I come to the teachers, I must talk about how important it is to encourage peer tutoring with a buddy system, not as if to say, I know more than you, and so I am tutoring you. So I think this is a wonderful way. Teachers can brainstorm with student groups and they can organize peer learning, fostering friendships without a set curriculum will help. Making learning a very participatory activity is very important. The National Education Policy beautifully touches on a few things which I strongly always believed in: the activity based education, the hands on experiences, experiments that children can do, computers that they can use the way they wish to, media that plays a very important role in learning, art that can be used, drama, dance, music, choral recitation, educational games, all of that promote a lot of learning. But that has to be an entire whole school program that, uh, has a lot of participation. Making events inclusive is very important. Mass participation, giving them a platform where they can present themselves. A very inclusive culture it becomes. So again, I'll share an experiment with us. For the past 50 years, this is at Singhania School in Thane, where every child has to come on stage at least twice but cannot repeat the same item. So you cannot be on stage for two musical items. You have to be in one: music or dance, music or drama, music or dramatization, or a speech. So the child gets an opportunity to participate and present himself for a parents' concert program in front of maybe 1,000 parents. And I think if we have the courage to be able to face that, we build confidence in children. So that makes it again an inclusive culture. Everyone knows that they cannot escape it. So it doesn't matter if I have two left feet, but I must dance because I'm not there to see your perfection. I am there to see and encourage you for what you're doing. Because tomorrow it can be your hobby or it can be your profession. But either way, there is something as it called education for the soul. That's music, dance, drama, all of these that is so important for us to be having a good life. Making events inclusive is one part of it. Tomorrow, in fact, we are having a virtual exhibition where it's called Anveshan, where science projects are presented from children from as young as 7 years of age to 17 years of age. And there are almost about 500 to 600 experiments on display. And this is on a YouTube channel. So parents get to see it and outsiders get to see it and appreciate. So that becomes a whole school program. So these are ways by which we can encourage inclusion. So children who don't really speak very well, may be very good in their hands, maybe very good in their scientific experiments. Give them an opportunity to do so. Importance of valuing oneself is very important, and that's something that every teacher must do. Teacher must be able to recognize every child for whatever they do, and when that happens, inclusion really happens. And with inclusion happening, I think much of what we wish to attain comes in so very well. And I must say at this point of time that as parents, as teachers, help your child expand the circle of influence that they have, the circle of concern that they have, the circle of care that they can give, for which each one of us as teachers must stand as a role model, as an icon, as a mentor. Because I was reading an article by a Harvard psychologist, Richard Weisbord, where he has started a project called Making Caring Common. And this project where he's teaching children how to be kind and grateful. And in his experiment, when he first went across and spoke to children, I believe 80% of the children in the US spoke that their parents were more concerned about their achievements, their successes, and their happiness, and thereby their happiness. And he said that until the time the parents talk only about themselves and about their own achievements and their pet children, and we don't make caring a priority for children and caring for others, the society will not change. And I did, and with that I read long back when I was I did a course in Harvard, and I thought I should implement that. A few years ago, I implemented rural immersion programs and reach out programs, much of what was said in the introduction. So all the schools, rural schools that we are mentoring are run by our own students. It has become so much a part of the culture that even after the school timings are over, they don't mind spending an hour in the rural center or the Adivasi school with the children, teaching them English language, teaching them games, teaching them yoga, teaching them sports. I think that's so important. And once they do that, they feel good about themselves. In the vocational training center for street boys that I run, none of them have completed their education. In fact, most of them are dropouts whom we have picked up from different parts of the city. And those are children whose soft skill trainings are done by the students of standard 11 and 12. So this is how we have a shared vision. Books for standard 1 and 2 are written by the students of standard 11 and 12. So these are rapid reader books, short stories, and these are written by students who go on an international exchange programs along with the international exchange students, so from different parts of Europe. So when those two of them bring down fairy tales from their own countries and write it in a simple language, it comes out very, very beautifully. And not only that, children learn about each other's culture and learn to celebrate that diversity. So that's what we need ultimately in our country. Next slide, please. So school leaders, you really have a special key. See, you have a golden key. You have a lot of children there with different abilities. How do we do what we do is important. That's culture. How do we create self-confidence and self-respect? How do we help each to participate actively? How do we help to realize the potential? How do we help them to build a vision for themselves? When all of this, the school leader makes it happen, he or she has created magic in her school or his school. And what is the magic about? The magic is about the culture of happiness. The culture of happiness in school is equal to the culture of inclusion in schools. Next slide, please. That's what I would like to say about it. This is what it is and summarizes my entire talk. Look at this beautiful iceberg. You can look at this iceberg as a whole organization. Look at it like your school. Look at it like your own company. We often see only the tip of the iceberg. And we say there's an iceberg and the ships steer their way away. Because only that part is visible. And it is also felt. When you hit it, you will feel it. That means the top portion is the outcome. It is a result. Beneath the waters lie a majority portion of that iceberg. It is not seen, it cannot be felt unless you hit it. And beneath that, all the things that are below that surface water is your culture that cannot be seen when it's being built. But if you hit against it, then you will know what it is. We all have to be careful about building below the surface component of the iceberg, the culture, so that the outer portion, the outcome, is bigger and the bottom is less. So when the outcome becomes big, then automatically the ship that comes its way will steer away. When we don't concentrate on the culture, which is the bottom portion of the iceberg, it will be the story of the Titanic that got wrecked. So remember that culture is what we don't know we are building, but we are building it by our own attitudes, by our own beliefs, by our own assumptions, by our own behavior. We're building the culture. The outcomes, the results will always be there. And it will be positive if you have worked with your hands, with your heart, and with your soul right onto the culture of your institution. I wish you all to build a happy culture, a culture of inclusion in your schools. We wish that every institution grows to set up an example for the other, and we are all inspired by each other to bring out a beautiful, inclusive culture in our country. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really an eye-opening. Now, I request our HOD ma'am, Dr. Harsha Gattu ma'am, to sum up. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Revathi. And, it was, I will confess, I never knew about you. And, the culture part, as you said, we have a culture in the Department of Education that we always like to innovate. So, I was just talking to my colleagues and I did a small research on the YouTube and TED Talks. And, your session just clicked me. So, I asked Gayatri, I don't know Revathi ma'am. Can we find out her, email and her mobile number, etc. And both Gayatri and Poonam, they jumped onto it. And I don't know how they figured out and searched you. But, the last slide that you said about the Titanic and the iceberg, I think down below the surface of the tip of the iceberg was the passion of my Department of Education to have the best people.
Thank
So,
you.
thank you. And it was such a wonderful session. We all have been boasting about us that we know everything of disability. And, yesterday the speaker was talking about within the disability sector, we are so diverse. So it's no, we all have to come at a common platform and work towards it. To sum up your session, it had everything, all the ingredients probably that we need for building an inclusive culture. Very nicely, you took us through the journey of culture, what actually it means, dividing it into four proper sections, and that speaks a great teacher in you. Because as we enter the class, we always give the children a picture as what are we going to talk about today. So you set the tone very nicely, and you had it is sectioned into what really culture means. And till now, as you saw on the slides also, probably the movie that the department had, the slides had prepared. Culture meaning we only think of food as a culture, our dress as a culture, our mannerisms as a culture. But the artifacts that you talked about an institutional culture, we never pay attention. As we have been talking last 2-3 days also, we don't have a culture of smiling also at each other. So,
Yes.
that just struck me, because when I went first time for my education in US, I was like, oh, I don't know this man, but how do they smile at us? How
Yes.
do they speak to us? And here for strangers, even the people whom we know every day, we don't smile at them. So the moment you enter into an institution, you get the feel of culture, what it is. And very nicely, you told us about the culture, which is not just tangible. It's not something that cleanliness of a school probably is a culture, but the examples that you gave, politeness, the beliefs, the habits, and everything, which is not tangible actually, those are the real culture of a school. For example, if you enter into a school and the school's administrative staff, especially, I hope, Gayatri, there's nobody from the admin in this department, our institutes. But, I went to my son's college once and I was amazed that how can the establishment and the accounts and the academic cells be so kind to you. I have never seen in my institution also that way. So I was touched upon that, and I came and shared with Suni and all others that we should have where the academic cell reaches out to the children and to the parents, offer them pens if they don't have, for filling in the applications, etc. So a holistic schools approach is what really struck. The inclusion, you defined it from the perspective of how it is practiced in your school, and you very rightly said that inclusion is it's not the goal, but it's the way we reach out to it, and so it's a process, it's a movement, I think. And you gave us very nice questions that we should not think of the what and why, but how we do it is important, because the how brings the culture, the way of doing things. Like we see, how does the grandma's dosa become so nice? Why? Because the love she pours in it, even they say the mother's pickle is best. Why? Because the love that goes inside it is the best. And I feel the same thing happens in school. And I remember, Revathi, when we first spoke, you said that the first day after this pandemic, when you had an assembly, your school children actually cried. And
Yes.
they wept that, they can't have face-to-face interaction with the director and, the CEO of the school, and you in particular, because they were used to you addressing them. And that's the culture, I think, you very rightly told about us. So you warned us about the toxic culture, and that is always there in the field. We see that there is a rat race for promotions, and there's a rat race to be in the good books of the higher ups. So if we give away with it, and we set a culture of democracy, and I think the landscape of the school will change with the new policy of education. So the process of acquisition of the inclusive culture in an institution, you gave us a top down model, because everything starts from the top and reaches to the bottom. So the school leaders, the management of the school, everybody has to show in their deeds and in their actions that we have an inclusive culture, not necessarily only for children with disabilities, but it is for any linguistic minority, or for that reason you said even the parents background. See, because Singhania school has the this thing of the corporate, the Raymonds, etc., but we have the same things in our special schools also, Revathi. Children from different backgrounds come in, and so it was a very good, the anecdotes were really good. The components, when you talk of the way you were painting the landscape of culture, I just thought for myself about Tatas, and how culture Tatas have set in the belief and the trust with it. So anything you would always want a feeling of trust and everything. So I just felt that as a this thing, that yes, we need to so blindly you can believe those things, that so when, especially when the young parents leave their children in the hands of the teacher, they should have that trust in them, and so the school's culture should be showcased. I liked the chabi ka challa that you gave us, and I had the habit of using that once upon a time, but gave up later on, because then I realized that when I used to walk in the corridors, my staff would know that I am coming around. So you gave us the nice keys to it, And those were the 5 keys that, very aptly you gave us about awareness. You have to be aware of your people coming in, the care relationship, the discipline, responsibility, mindfulness, shared vision. I won't go into the slide, but what really struck me was the relationship that you talked about, that how the internal and external relationship influence each other. The external brings in tensions and the feeling of insecurities, and how the internal thing really affects because of that. And I think that's the role of a head of the institution or a head of the department, to build trust amongst their own staff and students. And the last part of it, as you talked about the whole school approach and how to build about the inclusive practices, I think the golden key, as you said, is in the hands of the teachers. And that's most important, because, we have so many quotes about teachers, that a teacher is the one who is the, and even if you see, even गांव में आज चले जाइए आप, तो गांव में who is the person who is most respected is the teacher. So teacher has been always on the top of the society. And I think we teachers, because the policies, there's no dearth of acts and policies in our country. We have the RT Act, we have the RPWD Act, and now the National Policy of Education also is inclusive. So we don't have, and we have the political will also for inclusion, but we are the implementers, teachers, and if we use it in the proper sense, I think inclusion is possible. And that's the most important key that you gave us. And of course, the iceberg example, I think you can see in the chat box how many of them have really been so appreciative of it. So 13,000 diverse children is what you told us at the beginning. And we get jitters because we are used to small classrooms, just 8 children in one class in the special schools. I wonder how, Revathi, in 13,000 students, you manage to build a culture of, a different, of an inclusive school. So thank you very much. We have some of the questions in the chat box, but as we are particular about the timings, what we will do is we will post these questions to you. Sure. And if you could answer them, maybe on the last day, what we will do is we'll collect the answers and give it out to the participants.
Certainly.
So, thank you very much on behalf of the entire Ali Awar Jung National Institute. We are a Government of India's institution. We have 7 national institutes. So on behalf of the present director, Dr. Suni Matthew, and I know we have some of the past directors also. I don't know if Dr. Rangasai is here today, but on behalf of all of them, the faculty, staff, students, our alumni, we have a convention of educators of the deaf, and I see many of them, the presidents and the state chapter secretaries, Nisha Grover, Amita Burde. We have people from BHU, the Banaras Hindu University here. So on behalf of all our alumni, well-wishers, and the fraternity of special education and inclusive education, I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Varsha. I think I'm truly touched. And I thank all our viewers who have been there with us, because it's as enriching for me to have an audience which is so educated and so well up on knowledge on this, that it is important for us to get platforms like this so that we can share our ideas. Tomorrow, I will be listening while you speak. So I really look forward to that. Thank you.
We had about 350 participants today, so you have reached out to so many of us. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure and honor.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. We'll meet tomorrow by 10:45 sharp. As I lock the meeting by 11 o'clock, tomorrow we have a session on collaboration by Dr. Farida Madam. So we look forward to see you all tomorrow and a nice conversation on the chat box. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, expert. Thank you so much, Revathi ma'am.
Thank you so much.
सरस्वती अख्तरी है.
Ma'am, I am ending this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Akhtari was there. I didn't.
Yes, yes. Akhtari ma'am was there. Many of the alumni are there. Rangasai sir was there.
I saw.
Yes, yes. I am also looking at her. Dr.
Ma'am is also
Vasadar
there.
nicely summed
I
up.
have to cut down as I'm recording it. Sorry. Your technical in charge is not good.
Rangasai sir, can we see you for a moment? We haven't seen you.
I don't know. Where is he?
Yeah, okay, he has left. Akhtari, hi.
Akhtari ma'am is there. So that's the name. It's there.
Akhtari, थोड़ा वीडियो ऑन करो ना.
मैम मैं लॉक करूं, मेरी रिकॉर्ड हो रहा है. मैम एक सेकंड रुको, मैं रिकॉर्डिंग बंद करूं.